So when you look at the broad history of ancient architecture and cultural movements, there's this very familiar pattern that tends to emerge over and over again.
Yeah, you see it in almost every region.
You really do. An invading force or a hostile political power arrives somewhere, and they systematically level the region's most important physical monuments. And, usually the specific cultural practices attached to those monuments gradually fade away.
The structure crumbles, and, well, historically speaking, the people just scatter.
Yeah.
Because without a focal point, the dedication dissolves.
But then you turn your attention to the history of Catholic shrines in China. And when you look at that specific history, that familiar historical pattern completely shatters.
It really is a profound historical anomaly.
It is. We are looking at a historical landscape where the physical buildings are reduced to rubble, and sometimes repeatedly reduced to rubble, yet the devotion housed within them outlasts the destruction.
The faith of the people actually outlives the concrete and the stone. You have this enduring dedication that just refuses to be buried under the wreckage of the buildings meant to house it.
And that is exactly what we're exploring today. Welcome to our deep dive. For this exploration, we're looking at the profound, centuries-long devotion of Chinese Catholics to the Blessed Virgin Mary.
And to do this properly, we've gathered a very rich stack of source material for you.
We have. We're going to be examining academic histories, historical journals, specifically the Hong Kong Journal of Catholic Studies, which gave us a lot of insight.
Along with various Catholic news agency reports detailing more modern events, and of course, official papal documents.
Because the breadth of these sources is entirely necessary for you to get the full picture.
Oh, definitely. We're looking at a phenomenon that spans centuries, crosses vastly diverse geographic regions, and navigates through incredibly complex political eras. To really understand it, we need to look at it from multiple angles.
So, our mission for you today in this deep dive is to explore the specific physical shrines, the historical accounts of apparitions, the unique indigenous artwork that was created, and the dedicated days of prayer.
All of which highlight how a globally recognized religious figure became deeply and uniquely embedded in Chinese Catholic identity.
And I want to start us off with a question regarding the origins of all this, because, looking at the sources, how exactly did a devotion that was originally brought over from the West take roots so deeply in China?
Well, to answer that, we really have to rewind the historical clock significantly.
How far back are we talking?
We need to look back to the late 13th century. The source material notes that the first Catholics to arrive in China were the Franciscans.
Okay, that is a crucial distinction to make early on, because that sets the stage long before other religious orders arrived on the continent.
Yeah, it does. And right away, the sources detail the sheer difficulty of their arrival.
I mean, just getting there was an undertaking.
It was. The Franciscans ventured on this remarkably rugged journey across the Black Sea and Crimea to reach East Asia.
And upon their arrival, they encountered a land with deeply established ancient cultural traditions.
But they stayed and they built. The sources document that in the year 1299, these Franciscan missionaries built the first Catholic church in what is current-day Beijing.
But I think what is most relevant to our focus today is what they brought with them to help explain their faith to the local people.
Right, they brought their own established love for the church and for the Blessed Mother.
Because language barriers would have been a huge hurdle.
Oh, an incredible hurdle. So the Franciscans frequently used popular Marian images from their Italian homeland to communicate the Catholic faith.
And the image they used most often, according to the text, was known as the Madonna of Humility.
Yeah, and the sources describe the Madonna of Humility as a painting where Mary is depicted holding the infant Jesus in her lap, but she's seated low to the ground.
She's not on a grand throne or anything.
No, she's seated very low. And by utilizing this specific image to introduce their faith, the Franciscans were laying the critical groundwork for a strong devotion to Mary.
And this happens centuries before other orders, such as the Jesuits or the Vincentians, arrived and further expanded upon this foundation.
Yeah, they introduced a figure of gentle maternal care very early on.
This early introduction established incredibly deep roots. And for those looking to see the modern manifestation of those roots, you really only have to look at how the month of May is traditionally observed across mainland China today.
Which is fascinating because May is recognized globally in the Catholic Church as a Marian month. But the observance in China is particularly notable.
The geographic breadth of the celebrations during May is highly significant. The sources detail how Catholic communities gather for liturgies, communal rosary prayers, and these grand processions.
And this is not limited to one specific region or demographic either.
No, the reports highlight that these gatherings happen everywhere, from the major urban centers like Shanghai and Beijing, all the way to remote village chapels tucked away in the countryside.
To give you a specific example from the text, Bishop Joseph Shenbin of Shanghai formally opened the Marian month on the afternoon of April 30th.
And he did this at a very specific location, right?
Yeah, he celebrated a solemn mass at the Sheshan Basilica, and during his homily, he laid out a very clear framework.
He defined 3 distinct dimensions of authentic pilgrimage for the faithful. I want to break down those 3 dimensions for you, because what we see here is not just a call to travel to a shrine, but a comprehensive approach to spiritual life.
It's very structured.
So what was the first dimension he emphasized?
The first dimension he articulated was the necessity of maintaining a consistent daily prayer life.
Okay.
He stressed nourishing one's spiritual existence through deep, regular engagement with Scripture. So it begins internally.
But he doesn't let them stop there. He immediately pushes them outward with his second point.
Yeah, the second dimension was a call upon the faithful to bear public witness to their faith.
Meaning how they act in their daily lives.
Yes, he encouraged them to emulate the example of the Virgin Mary through visible lives of holiness and virtue in their everyday actions.
And then the third dimension kind of ties the internal prayer and the outward witness together, right? Into the physical act of the journey.
It does. The third dimension characterized the act of pilgrimage itself as a means of inner renewal and spiritual transformation.
So it is a physical journey that mirrors the spiritual journey.
Yeah. And beyond this personal renewal, the sources also point out a very specific collective intention during these May observances.
What are they praying for collectively?
Well, Chinese Catholics use this month to pray specifically for world peace and the preservation of communion among peoples.
That collective intention serves a dual purpose if you look closely at it.
How so?
On one level, it addresses contemporary global challenges, reflecting a broader concern for victims of conflict everywhere. But on another level, these May observances serve as a vital anchor point for the community itself.
I see.
By participating in these May devotions, Chinese Catholics are simultaneously honoring their own local, generations-old traditions, while also reaffirming their identity as members of a universal global church.
It strengthens their bonds of communion with Catholic communities worldwide.
It does. But I want to push on one aspect of this month of May observance, because the sources emphasize a profound amount of physical movement.
There's a lot of travel involved.
Yeah, you read about these May devotions, and it involves incredible travel. Why does this specific month involve such demanding physical journeys for the faithful?
Well, the physical movement is deeply tied to the tradition of long, arduous pilgrimages. These journeys are really a cornerstone of how the month is observed.
And the texts get very specific about how they travel.
They do. The historical accounts in modern news reports describe how tens of thousands of Catholics take to the waterways.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they travel in small, traditional boats called sampans, navigating through complex networks of canals for days just to reach specific shrines.
And for shrines located at higher elevations, the sources note pilgrims climbing steep mountains. Some even ascend the final rocky paths on their knees.
The physical exertion is clearly an integral part of the devotional practice. They are not taking the easy route by any means.
No, they are not. And this level of physical dedication brings us to a critical turning point in the history of this devotion.
Because to understand why certain locations became the focal points for these demanding pilgrimages, we have to examine the historical events of the year 1900.
Yes. The year 1900 marks the period of the Boxer Uprising. This was a period where nationalist and anti-Catholic soldiers, known as the Boxers, organized and launched severe attacks against Christian villages.
The historical accounts report that the Boxers viewed the Catholic religion as a foreign influence that threatened Chinese culture.
And consequently, they initiated sweeping, violent persecutions across multiple provinces.
It was a very turbulent time. And one of the most documented events from this period occurred in a small village called Donglu.
That's located in the Hebei province, correct?
Yes. Donglu was a mission founded by the Vincentian Fathers. And during the summer of 1900, the village found itself in a desperate situation.
How many people live there?
The village consisted of approximately 700 to 1,000 Christians. But the sources record that they were surrounded by an estimated 10,000 hostile soldiers.
10,000. The numerical disparity there is a key fact in the historical record. You have 700 to 1,000 villagers facing 10,000 soldiers.
It was an overwhelming force. And facing this, the local Chinese pastor, Father Wu, led the villagers in praying to the Virgin Mary for protection.
And what followed has become a central narrative in Chinese Catholic history.
It has. According to the popular accounts and witness testimonies cited in our sources, an apparition occurred.
What did they see?
The soldiers and the villagers reportedly saw a beautiful lady dressed in white, surrounded by a formation of bright light, appear in the sky directly above the village.
And the sources also note the appearance of another figure, right? A fiery horseman descending from the sky.
Yeah, whom the witnesses believe to be Saint Michael the Archangel.
And the reaction of the soldiers is documented as well.
The accounts state that the attacking soldiers fired their rifles and weapons directly at the apparition in the sky, but their gunfire had no effect whatsoever.
And then the horsemen took action.
The fiery horsemen then reportedly drove the attackers away from the village, causing the soldiers to flee and never return. The village of Donglu was completely saved from destruction.
That is incredible. And Donglu was not an isolated incident during the 1900 uprising.
No, it wasn't. A very similar event is recorded in the Shaanxi province, in a small Franciscan Catholic village called Luhikan.
So, in Luhikan, as the Boxers approached the village, the Catholic community gathered inside their small church to pray to Our Lady for protection.
And the elderly Catholics of that village passed down the account that the Virgin Mary, wearing flowing white robes, appeared above the church's clock tower.
The specific detail in the Luhikan account that stands out to me is what the apparition did next.
It's very specific, yeah. The apparition reportedly faced the various directions from which the Boxers were preparing to attack.
So she was kind of signaling them?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
By observing which direction the white-robed figure faced, the Catholic men inside the village were able to anticipate the assaults and prepare their defenses in advance.
And there's also a detail about the weapons used against Luhikan.
Yeah, the popular lore of the village recounts that when the Boxers attempted to use cannons against the village, the weapons inexplicably backfired on the attackers.
Wow. And beyond Donglu and Luhikan, the historical records briefly mention other reported supernatural events from the year 1900.
Like an apparition of Saint Michael in Beijing?
Yeah, and a weeping statue of Our Lady in the village of Santai.
When you look at these events collectively, you begin to see how they catalyzed a major shift in the community.
We're moving from a general religious practice to something deeply tied to their physical preservation.
That is the pivotal shift. These events cemented Marian devotion as a core aspect of survival and protection for these communities.
Deliverance from immediate physical destruction became forever linked to their prayers to Mary.
It was no longer just theology for them, it was their history.
And we can see the permanence of that shift in the daily practices that followed. For instance, in Luhikan, the sources note that the events of 1900 led to an enduring tradition.
A tradition that continues today.
Yeah, the village Catholics pray an evening rosary to this day, specifically honoring the heavenly protection that saved their village over a century ago.
It became an integral part of their communal history and their daily rhythm of life. The past remained very present for them.
Which brings up an important detail. After surviving the attacks of 1900, how did these communities choose to formally express their gratitude for that protection?
We know they prayed, but they also took physical action to memorialize it. Their gratitude manifested in the creation of physical shrines and the commissioning of unique, highly specific artwork.
And this brings us back to the village of Donglu.
Yes, in thanksgiving for the protection of the village, a Vincentian priest named Father René Flement commissioned the construction of a new church.
But a new church required a new image to be placed above the altar.
And in 1908, Father Flement commissioned a very specific painting, one that would completely change the visual landscape of the church in China.
The creation of this painting represents a fascinating intersection of cultures and artistic traditions.
It really does. The artist chosen for the commission was a Chinese Jesuit brother named Lu Desai.
And Brother Lu worked at the Tushanuan Orphanage Art Workshop in Shanghai, which was run by the Jesuits.
The visual details of the painting he created are meticulously described in our sources, and they are essential to understanding the image's impact.
Because he did not just paint a standard European portrait.
No, the most notable aspect of the painting's composition is the model that Brother Lu used.
Who did he use?
He based his painting of the Virgin Mary on an oil portrait of the Empress Dowager Cixi.
Really?
Yeah, it was an oil portrait that had been painted by an American artist named Catherine Carl in 1903.
Utilizing the portrait of the ruling Qing dynasty Empress Dowager as the foundation for a Catholic religious image is a striking artistic choice.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Let's look closely at the specific visual details described in the text. In the painting, Mary is depicted in royal courtly attire,
She is wearing a veil and a jewel-encrusted crown.
and she is holding a scepter in her hand. The sources also mention her facial expression is described as kind and merciful.
Now, what about the Christ child?
The Christ child is seated on her lap. He is depicted wearing a belted purple cloak, and significantly, he is wearing traditional Qing dynasty shoes on his feet.
That's a great detail.
He also wears a crown denoting royalty and has his arms stretched out.
And the background of the painting has some specific elements as well.
Yeah, the background features calligraphy of the Chinese character for longevity. On either side of the central figures, there are scenes of the Chinese countryside, complete with local houses and a pagoda.
And across the top, there's an inscription.
The inscription reads, "Our Lady of Donglu, pray for us."
When you consider the artistic choice to model the Virgin Mary on the Empress Dowager, you really have to ask how this specific choice functions within the broader context of the Catholic Church in China at that time.
It functions as a clear example of inculturation.
Merging the two traditions.
Yeah. The artist took a traditional Western religious representation, Mary and Jesus seated on a throne, and merged it with Chinese stylistic devices, royal symbols, and clothing.
So, by using the portrait of the Empress Dowager as a reference, the artist was presenting Mary not as a foreign figure imported from Europe, but as a regal queen embedded within a recognizable Chinese cultural and imperial framework.
Which made her accessible. And this localized image was then placed in the newly built church in Donglu.
Following this, the sources trace how Donglu quickly developed into a major pilgrimage center.
The momentum around this shrine grew rapidly. The timeline of Donglu's official recognition is quite clear in the historical records.
When was the first pilgrimage?
The first official organized pilgrimage to the site took place in 1929.
And the movement continued to build from there.
It did. In 1932, Pope Pius VII approved Donglu as an official Marian shrine.
Subsequently, in 1941, Pope Pius XII elevated the shrine to the status of a minor basilica and officially designated the feast day on the Catholic liturgical calendar.
But the history of Donglu is also marked by another highly documented event that occurred much later.
Yes, in the spring of 1995, specifically on May 23, 1995.
The date is significant because it was the vigil of the feast of Mary Help of Christians, and the sources provide a detailed account of what transpired that day.
It was a massive gathering. Over 30,000 Catholics gathered in an open field near the Donglu Shrine for Mass.
And the gathering included 4 bishops and nearly 100 priests.
So according to the reports, what happened during the Mass?
Well, during the opening prayer, and again later during the consecration, the gathered crowd witnessed an unusual phenomenon in the sky. Witnesses reported seeing the sun spinning from right to left.
The accounts state that the sun changed colors, specifically noting yellow, red, and blue, and emitted rays of light.
And this phenomenon reportedly lasted for approximately 20 minutes.
Furthermore, the witnesses reported seeing apparitions within the sky during this time.
Yeah, people stated they saw the Holy Family, as well as the image of Our Lady of China right there in the sky.
The events of that day had an immediate and vast impact on the faithful.
Oh, without a doubt. The very next day, May 24th, the sources report that security forces attempted to ban access to the site.
They started stopping buses and trains to prevent crowds from gathering.
But despite those official efforts to restrict movement, an estimated 100,000 pilgrims still managed to find alternative routes to reach the area and celebrate the feast day.
However, the physical structure of the Donglu Shrine did not survive the subsequent years.
No, it didn't. In April of 1996, the sources report that the physical church building was destroyed by the government and the statue was confiscated.
Yet, within that account of destruction, there is a crucial detail regarding the 1908 painting created by Brother Liu Dezai.
Yes, the text states that the original painting had actually been hidden inside the wall, placed securely behind a copy.
So they were prepared.
They were. And when the faithful searched through the rubble after the church was demolished, they found the original painting completely intact.
It survived the destruction of the building meant to house it.
The physical monument fell, but the core image remained unharmed.
To understand how the devotion to this specific image spread beyond the village of Donglu and reached the level of a national identity, we really have to look back to a major institutional event that occurred in 1924.
You're talking about the Shanghai Synod.
Yes, the Shanghai Synod.
Which was a monumental event in the history of Chinese Catholicism. It was the first national conference of bishops ever convened in China.
It was convened under a decree by Pope Pius XI, and the meeting was chaired by the apostolic delegate to China.
Archbishop Celso Costantini.
Yeah, and Costantini had a very specific vision for the church in China, one that focused on strengthening the local identity of the Catholic communities rather than relying solely on foreign missionary influences.
He recognized the need for indigenous expression, and his visit to a specific location in Shanghai proved to be pivotal for the Donglu painting.
Where did he go?
During his time in Shanghai for the Synod, Archbishop Costantini visited the Tushanwan Orphanage Art Workshop.
Ah, the very place where Brother Liu Dezai had painted the image back in 1908.
Exactly. The sources report that when Costantini saw the collection of Marian images at the workshop, he was immediately drawn to the 1908 Donglu painting.
His reaction was definitive, wasn't it?
It was. He declared, "We must popularize this image."
And he took immediate action.
He did. He immediately ordered that a large number of these images be printed for distribution to the bishops attending the synod.
Furthermore, he directed that the image be printed with a new unifying title,
Zonghua Shengbo, which translates to Our Lady of China.
This action by Costantini set the stage for the culminating event of the synod.
On June 14, 1924, Archbishop Costantini and 25 members of the synod left the meeting halls and climbed Shishan Hill.
Upon reaching the summit, they performed a solemn act. They officially consecrated the Chinese people to the Virgin Mary, invoking her under the title Regina Sinarum, or Queen of China.
When you look at this event, you see a profound institutional shift.
You really do. The 1924 Synod effectively elevated local regional devotions, like the one that originated in the small village of Donglu, into a formalized national Catholic identity.
By officially adopting a Chinese-styled image and consecrating the entire nation, the church leadership utilized this devotion to unify disparate and geographically separated Catholic communities across the vast country.
It takes an image commissioned by one priest for one village, and it transforms it into the visual representation of an entire national church.
It's remarkable.
Now, the location where they performed this national consecration is highly significant. They climbed Shishan Hill.
Yeah.
Why did Costantini and the bishops choose that specific location in Shanghai for such a monumental event?
Well, Shishan Hill already held a deeply established and revered place in the history of Chinese Catholicism, long before the 1924 Synod.
Its origins as a sacred site date back to 1844, right?
Yes. The sources note that the hill was named after a legendary hermit named Shi, and in 1844, a Jesuit priest named Father Claude Gaudeland arrived in the area.
And he was deeply impressed by the natural beauty and serenity of the mountain. The texts describe it as having 9 peaks above the clouds and forests of bamboo.
Father Gaudeland initially envisioned building a retreat house for retired priests there.
But he didn't live to see it built.
No, he passed away before realizing that vision. But his successor, Jesuit Father Joseph Gonnet, purchased the property on the hill in 1863.
Following the purchase, the development of the site progressed steadily. In 1868, Bishop Langulat consecrated a small chapel on the hillside.
But the pivotal moment that transformed Shishan into a major shrine occurred during a period of intense conflict.
A Taiping rebellion.
Yes. The historical records state that during the unrest and prejudice against the Catholic Church in Shanghai at that time, the Jesuit superior, Father Gu Zhensheng, also referred to in some texts as Father Delacorte, climbed Shishan Mountain.
He went before the statue of Our Lady and made a formal vow.
He promised that if the Diocese of Shanghai was spared from the turmoil and danger of the rebellion, he would build a grand basilica on the location in thanksgiving.
And the sources confirm that the diocese was indeed spared.
It was, and the church was subsequently built, opening in 1873.
However, the structure that stands today is the result of a much larger construction project that began decades later.
Construction on the Grand Shishan Basilica commenced in 1925 and took 10 years to complete, finishing in 1935.
The text points out that upon its completion, it was the first basilica ever built in the Far East.
Its importance was further solidified when Pope Pius XII officially raised it to the rank of a minor basilica in 1942.
Beyond the architecture of the building itself, the basilica is famous for the specific bronze statue that was placed on top of its tower.
The visual details of this statue are deeply symbolic and unique to Shishan.
What does it look like?
The statue depicts the Virgin Mary standing erect. However, unlike traditional depictions where Mary cradles the infant, here she is holding the child Jesus high above her head.
And the posture of the child Jesus is also highly specific, isn't it?
Yes, he's depicted with his arms outstretched in a cruciform gesture, presenting himself to the world.
Furthermore, the base of the statue incorporates Chinese symbolism merged with Catholic theology,
Mary is depicted standing on a traditional Chinese dragon.
which in this context represents the devil, complete with a trident tail.
Yeah, she is shown actively crushing it beneath her feet.
The history of this bronze statue also mirrors the history of the shrines we discussed earlier.
Sadly, yes. During the Cultural Revolution, the original bronze statue atop the basilica was destroyed.
The sources note that only the dragon base remained intact.
Yet, the devotion of the people persisted. In the year 2000, 10,000 believers pooled their funds to have a precise replica of the original statue cast in bronze and reinstalled on top of the tower.
And the pilgrimages to Shishan are a testament to that enduring devotion. We discussed the pilgrimages earlier, but the specific customs associated with Shishan are remarkable.
The sources detail the journey of the fisherfolk of Jiangnan.
These pilgrims sail their boats up the Yangtze River.
Yeah, navigating through a network of canals just to moor their craft at the foothills of the mountain. And they traditionally spend 3 days and 3 nights at Shushan.
And for those making the climb up the mountain, the physical act of ascending is a deeply spiritual exercise.
Pilgrims traverse the 14 stations of the cross that line the path up the hill, with many choosing to climb the steep ascent on their knees.
Given the deep local roots and unique physical customs of the Shishan Shrine, how does this specific location connect to the broader global Catholic Church today?
Well, the connection between the local shrine of Shishan and the global church was formally solidified in 2007 by Pope Benedict XVI.
The sources explain that in 2007, Pope Benedict XVI released a significant letter addressed to Chinese Catholics.
And in this letter, he officially established May 24th as the World Day of Prayer for the Church in China.
Why that specific date?
The selection of May 24th was chosen specifically because it is the liturgical feast of Mary Help of Christians, which is the specific patronal title venerated at the Shishan Basilica.
Ah, I see. To further cement this connection, the following year, in 2008, Benedict XVI composed a special official prayer dedicated to Our Lady of Shishan.
A prayer to be recited globally on this day.
This action by the Pope essentially took a localized Chinese devotion and elevated it to a point of universal solidarity for the entire global Catholic Church.
It did. However, the text reveals a fascinating historical precursor to the Pope's declaration.
Long before the official World Day of Prayer was established, another globally recognized figure held a profound personal connection to Shishan and to China.
That figure was Mother Teresa.
The documentation of Mother Teresa's relationship with China provides a very moving layer to this history.
It really does. The sources describe her desire to serve the people of China as a profound spiritual thirst.
It is noted as being her last and only unfulfilled wish to establish a house for her religious order, the Missionaries of Charity, in mainland China.
She actively pursued this wish. She visited China 3 separate times, in 1985, 1993, and 1994.
However, on each occasion, she was denied permission to establish a convent.
But despite the denial, her dedication to the Chinese church did not waver. It actually became institutionalized within her own order.
The sources highlight that 20 years before Pope Benedict XVI designated May 24th as the annual Day of Prayer, Mother Teresa established every single day as a day of prayer to Our Lady of Shishan.
For the church in China, within her own worldwide community.
Her personal devotion was also very tangible. The texts record that she carried a small statue of Our Lady of Shishan hidden within her sari until her dying day.
And during one of her visits to the Shishan Shrine, she reportedly offered a spontaneous, deeply symbolic prayer while looking at the unique statue.
The one of Mary holding the Christ child high above her head.
Yes. She prayed, Mother Mary, I will hold the baby and then you can open up the doors for me.
And while she never opened a house on the mainland, she remains a deeply revered figure there today.
The sources note she is affectionately known in China by the title de la Sainte Maman.
When we analyze Mother Teresa's connection to Shishan, the unique iconography of the statue itself perfectly aligns with her specific spiritual mission.
The image of Mary holding the child Jesus high up, offering him to the world, mirrored Mother Teresa's own stated thirst to bring Jesus to the people of China.
We have spent significant time discussing the major shrines of Donglu and Shishan, but the sources also detail several other regional locations. Do these other regional shrines demonstrate the same level of localized devotion?
Oh, they do. The diversity of the geographic locations mentioned in the sources is key to understanding the scope of this devotion.
Because it is not centralized in just 1 or 2 major cities.
No, it is widespread.
Let's look at a few of the specific examples provided in the text. There is the account associated with Bangwan Mountain.
The popular account from Bangwan Mountain dates back to the Ming Dynasty.
What's the story there?
It involves a humble shepherd girl from a Catholic village who was described by her peers as ugly.
According to the account, the Virgin Mary appeared to this girl and requested that a church be built.
But when the girl relayed this message, the villagers refused to believe her.
The narrative states that Mary then instructed the girl to wash her face in a nearby spring.
And upon doing so, the girl reportedly became beautiful.
This visible transformation convinced the villagers to believe her vision.
And the account concludes with the detail that after the villagers gathered building materials, those materials were miraculously moved overnight to the exact location where the church was to be built.
Moving from Bangwan, the sources also detail a shrine located in central Inner Mongolia known as Our Lady of Mozi Shan.
The origin of this shrine dates to June of 1905.
The texts report that after a sudden summer snow fell on the mountain, local shepherds witnessed a beautiful lady dressed in white ascending among the clouds.
Following this event, a Belgian missionary constructed a church on the site in 1906, along with a small fountain intended to provide water for pilgrims making the journey.
A third regional example is found in the Jiangsu province, specifically Our Lady of Lourdes in Qinyang.
The account from Qinyang involves an elderly woman who had suffered from a long illness.
She reported a vision of a kind lady in a white gown with a blue ribbon who instructed her to boil meadow grass to use as a medicinal tonic.
The woman followed the instructions and was cured.
And the text notes a fascinating cultural detail about this.
Yeah, the woman initially believed that she had been cured by Guanyin, the Buddhist figure of compassion.
It was only later, upon seeing a Catholic statue of Our Lady of Lourdes in someone's home, that she recognized the figure from her vision.
This led to the establishment of the Qinyang Shrine, which became widely known across the Yangtze River region.
When you synthesize the histories of these diverse locations, from the high altitudes of Inner Mongolia to the rural villages of Jiangsu province, it becomes evident that Marian devotion in China is a profoundly widespread, deeply rooted aspect of Chinese Catholic identity.
The geographic spread confirms that this devotion is not an isolated phenomenon, but a foundational element of their shared faith experience.
We have covered a vast amount of historical ground for you and examined numerous locations. To bring all of these distinct threads together, how would you summarize what this stack of sources ultimately reveals about the resilience of this devotion?
Well, the sources reveal an incredible historical journey. It begins with the early Franciscan missionaries using the Madonna of Humility to introduce the faith.
Then it transforms during the intense violence of 1900, where communities like Donglu and Luhikan attributed their physical survival to heavenly protection.
It is then visually codified through the creation of unique indigenous art, like Brother Lu Deshai's painting of Our Lady of China, which utilized the imagery of the Qing dynasty.
It's institutionalized on a national scale through the construction of the Shishan Basilica and the formal national consecration at the 1924 Shanghai Synod.
And finally, its global significance is recognized through the spiritual dedication of figures like Mother Teresa and the official declarations of Pope Benedict XVI.
Every source we have examined points back to a central, unavoidable fact documented throughout this history. You can look at the physical destruction of the Donglu Shrine by security forces in 1996, or the destruction of the original bronze statue at Shishan during the Cultural Revolution.
You can look at the efforts to ban pilgrims from traveling.
But the historical record shows that the original Donglu painting survived hidden perfectly intact in the rubble. It shows that tens of thousands of pilgrims continue to find ways to gather in open fields to pray, even when the churches themselves are gone. The final thought we must draw from this text is that the devotion itself has entirely outlasted the physical structures that were built to house it.